I have nothing against hedonism, don't get me wrong. I just don't I just want it clearly understood, we're going to toot this up and have a good time, not that this is part of the spiritual quest. And the most terrifying drugs are the most harmless, specifically DMT. DMT is so like what's already in your head that it clears within 5 minutes. That's a very good measure of how toxic a compound is how fast can your body identify it, deanimate or dealkylate it, and return everything to equilibrium. Psilocybin you come back into focus after about 6 hours. Ayahuasca, which uses DMT and an MAO inhibitor, it turns over in about 4 to 6 hours. So what bothers me about all these new drugs is that they are escapes from the obligation to do strong drugs. I think that the great popularity of cocaine is because nobody ever disgraced themselves on it, Nobody ever started babbling about how much they regretted what a jackass they were. And that's what these psychedelics do. They make you get down and grovel in the dirt. God, I had this trip in Hawaii that was just horrible, where it was saying, you think you're such hot stuff, you won't even get off your ass and go shit in the field. I want to see you grovel, man. You sit up in front of all these people and pontificate on how it's all put together. Face me now in the darkness and tell me how it's all put together. I just hate it, It puts me through the ringer. But nothing else is really useful, Adele. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're right. The problem is that in my experience, it's very prone to abuse. The people who propose it are reluctant to tell you how much they do it because they know how damning that information would be about their position. I mean, I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I've just observed this, that you say, well, you're telling me your patients respond wonderfully to this and that you see the dissolution of neuroses and this sort of thing. This is wonderful. By the way, how often do you take it? Oh, 3 times a day, and you've been at it for 1.5 years. I see. You must have your neuroses fairly well dissolved by this time. It's a different issue, I think. Therapeutic compounds in, as Adele says, the correct settings, the hands of skilled therapists. God knows we all are neurotic, and that's fine. But but this spiritual dimension, this ingression into these ancient, alien information fields which orient you to the bones of the planet and the plan that has, the galactic plan, if you want. This is a whole different issue. I use Rupert's theory to explain to myself why the organic psychedelics are so much richer. It's just that with the new drugs, they haven't taken enough people yet. And so to speak to a drug which no one here has yet cared to defend, ketamine. I've done ketamine a number of times, and my impression is always of this marvelous skyscraper filled with these vast Keristan carpeted rooms and water coolers every 20 doorways. But where is the stuff? Where is anything? No one has moved in. Apparently they're finding it hard to let because it's just empty. And you move from room to room, and the emptiness is a kind of ecstasy, an exaltation. I love those angularities and the ketamine bit. But the final thing, the final conclusion is too heavy a physical impact, too heavy an impact on the immune system, clings to you too long, and too state-bounded. And by state-bounded, I mean how much can you bring out of it? How much can you bring out of it? Not that you have to communicate it to your friends or your lover, but how much of it can you communicate to yourself 24 hours after it's happened? The whole goal, it's a shamanic thing. It's to go to the well at the center of the world and recover the pearl and return with the pearl. If you can't return with the pearl, you're not a good shaman. I mean, it was a good try, and nobody makes it every time. But that's the bottom line, yes. The drugs of the future are in the forest primeval. That the Faustian scientists, the demonic artificers of the laboratory, the bad little boys of science will eventually understand that nature has outsmarted them, and that with these now super refined analytical techniques that can pick up just a few molecules of an anomalous compound in a substance, we're seeing that plants are far richer than we supposed based on the data derived from late 19th century and early 20th century studies of plants. Also, there are amazing hallucinogens about which very, very little is known. And even hallucinogens which are considered relatively well explored. How can you say a hallucinogen is well explored? The ayahuasca complex in the Amazon is fascinating. Appears to be not only a hallucinogen, but a curing force regardless of the visionary effect. And people are taking it as a purgative and generating states of equilibrium and good health from it. I scoured India. I submitted myself to a number of different disciplines, and I think they are just the dimmest reflections of what is possible on psychedelics. I had an Indian acquaintance last year who took mushrooms for the first time. He had been practicing yoga for years and years and years, and he said, "Now I understand why they call yoga practice." So, Dawn. Well, that's really my brother's area. He had this idea, which was not a traditional idea. He had a sort of a ideological conniption fit in which he had this notion at a very nuts and bolts level of how you could lock into the earth signal, if you want to put it that way, or the information channel that is coming through psilocybin. And it had to do with using your voice to harmonically cancel and the interiorized tone that is generated sometimes on psilocybin, which he interpreted to be actually the sound of the electron spin resonance of the molecules. Sound is a imprecise term, but the waveform phenomenon given off by the electron spin resonance of the molecules as they intercalated into their bond sites. He thought he could use his voice to lock it in. And in fact, if any of you know True Hallucinations, which is a talking book of 8 tapes that we have produced, it tells the story of that expedition and everything that went into it. And the results were ambiguous, but so terrifying that we didn't care to continue. It did appear that you could use self-generated sound to synergize and prolong these drug states, but it also appeared that you were putting your sanity right out on the line, and that we need more data before we plunge into an effort to recreate that kind of an experiment. But that was the dream, to lock in the high, to get the voice and hold it, and to have all the physiological effects fade away, but keep the connection. In the way that Socrates said he had a daemon of a teaching voice, which he could refer to anytime. Julian Jaynes' book on the origin of consciousness and the bicameral mind goes into this whole thing about how early primitive people may have had interiorized voices which directed them and their lives, and that it was the incorporation of that function that created the modern psychic function, which we call the ego. The ego is a trapped God, is what it is. We grew so blasé in the face of it that it became a part of ourselves. At least this is Jane's theory. Yes. How do you do it, you mean? It's easy to tell you how to do it, and it's amazing how few people do it right. You do it in darkness, on an empty stomach, in silence, and alone. Doesn't sound like much fun, does it? It isn't. Yes, although to really see, psilocybin works in darkness. The visions. I mean, a full moon night is absolutely stunning on a psychedelic, no question about it. But the Mazatecans and Zapotecan Indians, all the ayahuasqueros we ever dealt with in the Amazon, it was all about getting into the hut, closing the door, blankets over the windows, dousing the light. They didn't do it alone. They did it in large groups, and it's all for himself, yeah. But if you did it alone, you were considered a shaman, I think. I think that's a lower dose. Most people who take mushrooms and claim knowledge of what mushrooms are about are talking about the 2 to 3 gram level. The game doesn't begin till you reach 5 grams. And the thing to remember when you're calculating dose, and also once you're loaded, is that it can't kill you. It can only convince you that it can kill you. So, to take 5 grams, to take 6 or 8 grams is pretty terrifying. There's no reason why you couldn't take 50, 60, 70 grams. I'm not advocating it. I would never do it. But it's because of your mind, not your body. It isn't a danger to your body. In the controversy about MDMA that has gone back and forth many different ways, I said of psilocybin, here's a drug that's perfectly safe and makes you think you're dying every time you take it. MDMA, on the other hand, it never enters anybody's mind that there might be a problem, and actually they're brushing right up against the Grim Reaper. So that's a funny. And when it convinces you, when psilocybin convinces you that you're dying, there is not one iota of doubt left. It doesn't partially convince you. It entirely convinces you. And then you just go through it, It doesn't always do that, but it's good to expect it to do that because you don't want to be caught by surprise by that particular deal of the deck,